Remember when you were a kid? It was a big deal how you separated the recyclables from the garbage. This is a big deal. They would teach it to you in third grade, in second grade, in first grade. You would come to school and you'd brag to your teacher how you'd taken all the plastic bottles and you'd put them in one container, and you'd taken all the trash and you'd put it in the other container because recycling was how we were going to save the world. Well, now there is a report out from the Boston Globe that plastic recycling is a myth. This study comes courtesy of Greenpeace. Quote, of the 51 million tons of plastic waste U.S. households generated in 2021, just 2.4 million tons, or 5%, was recycled, according to new research. Because, of course, it turns out that the vast majority of plastic you can't separate out from the other garbage. When plastic is burned in garbage incinerators, it produces even more planet-heating pollution. Studies show that even discarded plastic gives off methane and other powerful greenhouse gases. The simple fact is that there was no good way to actually recycle this stuff. Research has long shown that most recycling facilities do not accept 5 of the 7 classifications of plastic, including plastic foam and PVC, because they're particularly difficult to sort and are often contaminated with toxins. But the new report shows that even the 2 most common plastics that have long been considered recyclable are only reprocessed 21% and 10% of the time, according to the report. For all the other types of plastic, the reprocessing rate is even lower at less than 5%, according to the authors. Now, why are we talking about recycling? The answer is because for literally my entire lifetime, from the time I was a child until now, if you had gone out there and you had said, recycling plastic is a giant waste of time, it is a giant waste of resources, this was seen as fringe. It might have been seen as misinformation, because this is the way our informational ecosystem works. Very often, there are these myths that are created on behalf of left-wing interests, and these become the prevailing narrative, and this narrative can never be crossed. We saw this with COVID, where vaccines were told that if you had to take a vax in order to stop your best friend or your grandma from getting COVID. When it came to masks, masking children in the classroom was necessary in order to keep them safe. If you said anything differently, then you might be quashed on social media for misinformation. If you suggested that Black Lives Matter was predicated on a lie, the lie being that the police are systemically rounding up black people for no apparent reason, rather than simply targeting criminality, and it turns out that criminality in the United States, especially violent criminality, is disproportionately minority. That if you pointed that out, there was a good shot that you were going to be silenced on social media or throttled on social media. If you said that a man could not be a woman and a woman could not be a man, you might end up like the Babylon Bee, and you might end up banned from Twitter. Now, the reason I bring all of this up is because some of us were saying, this does not look like the simple free market at work. This looks a lot more like governmental actors acting in collusion with the government in order to promote preferred narratives. That sure, there are left-wing heads of places like Twitter or Facebook, the Jack Dorseys or the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. But if you look at how they originally articulated their visions for their companies, they suggested that these big social media companies were designed to be free speech platforms. These were places where all speech was going to thrive. 1,000 flowers were going to bloom. Sure, there would be limits. If you were like an open Nazi advocating for genocide, they would ban you. But if you were just somebody who questioned, say, recycling plastic, or if you were somebody who said perhaps BLM's narrative is wrong, or if you were somebody who said that men are men and women are women, and that you can't become a woman if you're a man, if you said that sort of stuff, you would not be quashed. If you read everything that Mark Zuckerberg said until about 2018, this is what he said pretty openly. Jack Dorsey, same thing until about 2017. And then something changed. Suddenly all the social media sites in unison started working with each other, colluding in order to silence certain accounts. And so you'd see every single major social media site simply ban the president of the United States on coordinated cue after January 6th. Or you would see even people that I don't like, people like Alex Jones, who I think is despicable in very many ways. You'd see people like Alex Jones, suddenly, bam, he was gone, just disappeared, just unpersoned from all of social media at the drop of a hat. Not because of any specified sin, but because there was collusion in order to just get rid of him. So did that look as though that was the normal corporate competition at work? It did not. And the simple fact is that we have known for a very long time that these social media sites have been throttling particularly conservative opinion makers. Now, I can tell you on a personal level, now listen, I have 4.7 million followers on Twitter. As of about 4 days ago, I had less than 4.5 million followers on Twitter. And then Elon Musk took over Twitter, and suddenly my follower count shot through the roof. And you can see it in my engagement as well. Facebook very often changes its algorithm, and those algorithmic changes benefit legacy media at the expense of startup media. Well, now, as it turns out, the DHS was in fact coordinating with social media in order to quash particular types of stories. This was most obvious, of course, when it came to the Hunter Biden laptop fiasco right before the 2020 election. It became clear that the FBI was actively coordinating with social media sites in order to quash that story. Mark Zuckerberg openly admitted that. He said the FBI was calling us and they were telling us about the possibility of Russian disinformation on the laptop story. And so we decided, best practice, we'll just quash the thing. Well, now, according to The Intercept, which is a left-wing source, Ken Klippenstein, a left-winger, and Lee Fang reporting, quote, The Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its efforts to curb speech it considers dangerous. An investigation by The Intercept has found. Years of internal DHS memos, emails, and documents obtained via leaks and an ongoing lawsuit, as well as public documents, illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms. The work, much of which remains unknown to the American public, came into clearer view earlier this year when DHS announced a new Disinformation Governance Board. Remember that we talked about this Disinformation Governance Board. It was run by the crazy lady who was singing Mary Poppins tunes about misinformation and disinformation. The Disinformation Governance Board was a panel designed to police misinformation, false information spread unintentionally, disinformation, false information spread intentionally, and malinformation, factual information shared typically out of context with harmful intent that allegedly threatened U.S. interests. While the board was widely ridiculed, immediately scaled back, and then shut down within a few months, other initiatives are underway as DHS pivots to monitoring social media now that its original mandate, the war on terror, has been wound down. Behind closed doors, says The Intercept, and through pressure on private platforms, the U.S. government has used its power to try to shape online discourse. According to meeting minutes and other records appended to a lawsuit filed by Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, a Republican who's also running for Senate, discussions have ranged from the scale and scope of government intervention in online discourse to the mechanics of streamlining takedown requests for false or intentionally misleading information. Microsoft executive Matt Masterson, former DHS official, texted Jen Easterly, a DHS director, in February, quote, "Platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain." And the idea is that they're supposed to be working hand in glove together. Now, this is not what is supposed to be happening in the free speech realm. Once private corporations become tools of the government, the First Amendment is implicated. There are a lot of people on the left who have said, well, you don't like the way that Facebook polices misinformation. Build your own Facebook. You don't like the way that Twitter polices its information. Well, build your own Twitter. And then, of course, immediately, once Parler starts, then the first thing that happens is that after January 6th, all of its server space is denied to Parler. It's essentially deplatformed. But it's worse than this. And when it comes to the government actively colluding with private institutions in order to quash speech, that is First Amendment activity that is being violated by the government. When the government offers incentives and disincentives to quash speech, this is a violation of First Amendment principles. In a March meeting, according to The Intercept, Laura Demlow, an FBI official, warned that the threat of subversive information on social media could undermine support for the U.S. government. Demlow, according to notes of the discussion attended by senior executives from Twitter and J.P. Morgan Chase, stressed that we need a media infrastructure that is held accountable. Now, I'll tell you that the scariest part of that particular sentence is J.P. Morgan Chase. The reason that is particularly scary is because one of the things that we have seen over the course of the last couple of years is serious talk about debanking people who disagree. So we saw during the trucker convoy protests in Canada that people who were financially supporting the truckers in any way, shape, or form saw their bank accounts frozen in Canada. Could J.P. Morgan Chase work with the government along those lines? And you say disapprove things and suddenly you no longer can bank? We've seen this, by the way, with some credit card companies who refuse to allow you to use their credit cards to purchase, say, firearms legally under the Second Amendment. And this sort of effort to cut people out of the regular modes of conversation and indeed market action, it's nefarious and it's tyrannical. And the government promoting that in the name of corporatism is really terrifying, or should be. A spokesperson for Twitter wrote in a statement to The Intercept, quote, "We do not coordinate with other entities when making content moderation decisions, and we independently evaluate content in line with the Twitter rules." I highly doubt that, given, again, the obvious coordination between Twitter and other social media groups when it comes to taking down various actors, some of whom I think are terrible, but it doesn't matter. You don't just get to take people down because you don't like their opinion. There's a formalized process for government officials, according to The Intercept, to directly flag content on Facebook or Instagram and request that it be throttled or suppressed through a special Facebook portal that requires a government or law enforcement email to use. At the time of writing, the content request system at Facebook is still live. DHS and Meta, the parent company of Facebook, did not respond to a request for comment. The FBI declined to comment. DHS's mission, according to The Intercept, to fight disinformation stemming from concerns around Russian influence in the 2016 presidential election began to take shape during the 2020 election over efforts to shape discussions around vax policy during the COVID pandemic. Documents collected by The Intercept from a variety of sources, including current officials and publicly available reports, reveal the evolution of more active measures by DHS. According to a draft copy of DHS's quadrennial Homeland Security Review, DHS's capstone report outlining the department's strategy and priorities in the coming years, the department plans to target, quote, inaccurate information on a wide range of topics, including, quote, the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of U.S. support to Ukraine. The challenge is particularly acute in marginalized communities, the report states, which are often the targets of false or misleading information, such as false information on voting procedures targeting people of color. Now, again, look at those issues right there, that list of issues. The origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what exactly would be the misinformation or disinformation? I doubt that they are talking about the Chinese government promoting the idea that the Americans started COVID-19. My guess is that it has much more to do with the probably true allegation by Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas that this thing was a leak from the Wuhan lab. How about the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines? For most of the last 2 years, you could be banned on social media for suggesting that the vaccines, while effective in preventing death and serious disease among older people, might have some negative side effects for younger people and did not prevent transmission. In fact, it's quite possible that this particular segment of today's show will be cut from YouTube. Racial justice, like what exactly about racial justice would have to be throttled? Do you think that it would be people saying that it is not disproportionate arrest statistics to actual criminal activity? Do you think that that's what they would throttle? Or do you, like, what do you think they would throttle? They would throttle every conservative position. U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan? What is the misinformation associated with that? The answer, of course, is that there is no misinformation associated with U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. It was horrifying. And of course, DHS is trying to crack down on the dissemination of this information. This is why it's very dangerous to give government this much power. According to The Intercept, how disinformation is defined by the government has not been clearly articulated. The inherently subjective nature of what constitutes disinformation provides a broad opening for DHS officials to make politically motivated determinations about what constitutes dangerous speech. DHS justifies these goals, which have expanded far beyond its original purview on foreign threats to encompass disinformation originating domestically by claiming terrorist threats can be, quote, exacerbated by misinformation and disinformation spread online. But the laudable goal of protecting Americans from danger has often been used to conceal political maneuvering. So again, the simple fact that these insane DHS regulations are designed to pressure social media on issues of great public import, it should be incredibly scary. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show is continuing now. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to get into the Supreme Court, which held a hearing yesterday on ditching affirmative action, finally at long last. Plus, Israel is holding its election today. Its latest election. They have one every 7 minutes or so. If you're not a member, click the link in the description and join us.